Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Nick Petro here at the National Weather Service in Raleigh. Thank you for joining me here. I know it was short notice. It's 2 p.m. on this Sunday, the 15th of March, and I know obviously it was short notice of this webinar. So for those who are able to join live, thanks so much. And for those who are watching this after the fact on YouTube, thanks so much for joining. This briefing covers essentially, this 2-day severe weather, but really the most of it's one day. It's tomorrow. I say 2-day because we can't rule out an isolated strong to severe storm, primarily overnight tonight, later tonight. But really we're talking, we're talking mainly tomorrow is the main event. Okay, so a couple things that jump right off the page. Okay. 15 to 30% probability of tornadoes tomorrow, and some of those could be significant. Now, what do we mean by significant? We're talking EF2 is like the low end of significant, right? I mean, for somebody who gets hit by an EF1, that's significant to them, right? But just for meteorological definition, we're talking EF2 or stronger. Okay, and then wind. This is, most people are going to experience wind damage. Straight line wind damage. Now, the thing is that with the straight line wind damage, and John, I just saw your note there. We'll get that corrected. So I appreciate the heads up there. This could produce, the wind could produce tornado-like damage. Okay, so if you see substantial damage, don't automatically assume it was a tornado. Obviously, if you see a tornado, that's different, right? But the key thing I want to say here is that this could result in some significant straight line wind damage, and we're talking hurricane force gusts or higher, 74 or higher, and there's a 60 to 75% probability of widespread damaging winds. So folks, get ready. I mean, for some gusty winds. I've already gone around my property and picked up some loose stuff and tied down some stuff that I thought would blow away. I took care of that already. So if you haven't done that yet, that's something I would do before things get going tomorrow. Okay. For hail, that's probably the thing we're going to see the least of. But if it were to occur, okay, particularly in tornadic producing storms, the hail could be 2-inch in diameter or more. Okay. So, that's the size of hail that could break windows. All right. So, and punch holes in vinyl siding, so keep that in mind. Of course, storms of this intensity are going to have excessive cloud-to-ground lightning, so that alone is deadly threat. The good news is, if there's any good news, is little to if any flash flooding is expected, mainly because of the speed at which these storms are expected to move. So keep that in mind. Now, for location, it's pretty much all of central North Carolina, and the timing is going to be, there could be a very stray or isolated strong to severe storm, again, as I mentioned, overnight tonight, or say during the morning tomorrow, particularly across the eastern portions of the state. But the main line that will be responsible for the bulk of the wind and tornado damage will be, afternoon and evening. Okay, and it's going to move pretty quickly across the state, but we're talking maybe early afternoon, mid-afternoon at the latest across western portions of central North Carolina, like the Piedmont down toward the Triad down toward Wadesboro. Primarily mid to late afternoon for the Triangle down towards Carthage and maybe the Sandhills region. And then trending more towards late afternoon, if not early evening, for the I-95 corridor and coastal plain, places like Goldsboro, Fayetteville, Roanoke Rapids, Rocky Mount, Tarboro. So, now again, timing of these things evolve. So if it comes in a little earlier, that's a possibility we don't want to overlook. If it trends a little later, that's still on the table. It could be a little later in the day. Okay, but these things that move fast, and this is a fast moving system, sometimes they tend to be a little sooner rather than later in terms of arrival. So that's why I kind of I'm painting it with a broad brush, at least at this point, and saying afternoon into early evening. Okay, but I don't want to. I don't want people to think that we're off the hook even in the morning hours. There could be, like I said, a very stray or isolated strong to severe storm even in the morning. Okay, so that's kind of an overview. This is for today, okay, marginal risk. And we think the risk is, mainly an isolated damaging wind gust, maybe an isolated low-end tornado, okay, but again, this is, again, very, very low risk, a level 1 risk. And again, we're thinking mainly overnight tonight. It's just too dry and stable right now to really get going right now, okay, at least for the next few hours. We're waiting for a warm front and some higher, richer moisture air to move up from the south. That's not going to happen until through the evening and overnight hours, okay? So we got to get some more moisture in here before the severe storm risk increases for today anyway. All right, but again, looking at breaking it down by tornado, wind, and hail, the highest probability is for damaging winds, okay? Although, again, you can't rule out an isolated tornado, okay? Again, mainly overnight tonight. All right, now this is the real meat of the event here, moderate risk for severe storms on Monday. And one of our meteorologists here does a great job keeping track of historical contexts and has some information he passed along in our NWS chat room that mentioned, it's been since 2021 since we've been in a day 2 moderate risk for severe storms. And on that day, when that happened, there were several tornadoes that occurred. So put that into historical context. Okay, so let's just jump right into some of the more finer details. So again, a 15 to roughly 30% probability of tornadoes, okay? And that, significant, there could be some significant tornadoes, EF2, are possible. But the real primary threat for most people, threat for most people is damaging straight line winds, some of which could be tornado-like damage, okay? So again, that's why we go out and do surveys, right? Just because, a roof is ripped off doesn't mean it was a tornado. Just because trees were toppled doesn't mean it was a tornado. Twisted trees, particularly pines, the fibers in the pines, when a pine tree snaps, it's going to twist. I mean, if you've ever looked at a snapped off pine tree and you see all these fibers, they're softwoods. So they're naturally going to twist when they fall. Twisted trees does not guarantee or does not mean automatically that it was a tornado, okay? So just keep that in mind. Regardless, the wind damage is going to be the same, tornado-like, whether it's straight line winds or an actual tornado, okay? So keep that in mind. The most likely form of severe weather will be damaging winds, okay? Now, with tornadic producing storms, they're usually supercells, and supercells can produce big hail. So that's why we think there is a probability that there could be some localized 2-inch hailstones possible. Okay, that's what the hatching there means. So that means that, again, the larger hail again, and that's the 15 to roughly 30% probability. Okay, so this graphic pretty much lays out what we think is the most likely type of severe weather, wind, but that wind damage could be hurricane force or tornado-like in impact. But again, if we do see tornadoes, they could be pretty strong. All right. So I know a lot of folks like these radar simulations. Please, please, please do not take these verbatim. These are not meant to say that one city or another is going to get a particular storm at a particular time or intensity. These are just very rough ideas for timing, not intensity. Okay? All right. So let's see, the takeaway here, and in the red box is when it's valid. Okay, so the takeaway is we can't rule out a few showers and thunderstorms as we head through the rest of today into the overnight hours. Okay, I think this particular model, it might be a little too aggressive, particularly in the evening hours. I think the bulk of this activity is going to be more towards the later in the evening and overnight hours. Okay, but again, we can't rule out a stray or isolated strong storm or severe storm. In terms of tomorrow, here's the main event. So there's going to be two things going on, two areas to focus, particularly earlier in the day across the immediate coastal areas. There's going to be a batch of storms that move up and impact pretty much the eastern fourth of the state, maybe even the eastern fifth of the state. anywhere from the daybreak hours right through 8 o'clock or so in the morning. In the early afternoon, we're going to see a lot of moisture moving up from the south. So again, you'll notice in the upper right, the 10 a.m. Time frame shows a few isolated thunderstorms there. Again, any one of those could be strong to severe. So this could be pretty much any time tomorrow. But the main line is this batch further to the west. So this is this batch right here that I'm highlighting is sort of, if you will, the main event. Okay, what do I mean by main event? I mean the line of storms that is most likely to produce that widespread straight line wind damage that could be hurricane strength or stronger, and the more intense tornadoes. Okay, and when is that? Again, don't forget about these few cells out ahead. Those few cells in the late morning hours could produce isolated damaging wind gusts or an isolated tornado. But the main event, moving across the I-77 corridor just west of Greensboro, coming upon the Charlotte metro area right around midday. And then you have it sweeping across the Triad down to Wadesboro early afternoon, 2 p.m.-ish. Okay, and then you have it across the Triangle, moving through the Triangle later in the afternoon. Okay, so again, please, keep in mind there could be some subtle adjustments to this timing. It could come in a few hours earlier. It could be a little later. But as we head into the evening hours, moving and impacting across the I-95 corridor around 6 p.m., and then moving across eastern North Carolina during the evening hours. Okay, and finally, this last little batch of rain here will be with the actual front itself. Okay, so so there could be some leftover showers, if you will. This area here, and hang on, let me get my highlighter out. Gosh, I keep closing that out. Bear with me for just a second. This little batch right here should be sub-severe as it moves across, right? This is more associated with the front, so I wouldn't expect, could there be some lightning with it? Sure, but I don't expect, this very, very last batch should be just the lingering leftover showers with the actual front. The main event is going to be sort of that prefrontal line that's kind of out here, as I pointed out. Okay? All right. Again, I'll be emailing. I haven't emailed these out yet, but as soon as we disconnect here, I'm going to email these slides out and post them to the top of weather.gov/Raleigh. Okay, they're going to have a prominent space. So for those not on our email list, don't worry. You can get them as soon as they hit our email chain. You can get it at weather.gov/Raleigh right at the top. All right. Here's another way to look at timing. I haven't really showed these a lot lately, but the Storm Prediction Center started producing these a couple years ago. But the key takeaway for this is that the timing for when we expect the widespread, intense, damaging straight line winds and tornado time is roughly could be about the same. And the takeaway time is that we're talking an afternoon through evening event. Okay, so I'll let folks take a look at these on their own. But wherever this graph is peaked, those are the time it's most likely to occur. Okay, all right. So let's sort of summarize this in a couple bullet points. Okay, and then I'll get to questions. Scattered thunderstorms may develop or move into central North Carolina overnight, as early as this evening. The strongest storm could produce localized damaging wind gusts or an isolated tornado. Number 2, a strong cold front will sweep across the region on Monday. Widespread thunderstorms are expected, although a few strong to severe storms could develop during the morning hours. The primary and greatest thunderstorm threats are expected during the afternoon into early evening hours, with that timing trending earlier west and later east. Okay, so earlier west and later east before that main line sweeps through. All right. In terms of severe likelihood and intensity, roughly 15 to 30% probability of tornadoes. Some could be EF2 or stronger. About a 60 to 75% probability of widespread damaging wind. Some could have hurricane force wind gusts, which could produce tornado-like damage. Okay? And then a 15 to 30% probability of damaging hail. And in those strongest storms, the hailstones could be as large as 2 inches in diameter. Okay? Again, 2-inch diameter hail could bust windows and poke holes in vinyl siding. Okay? Obviously, crop damage as well too. So don't forget about that. We don't want to forget about our ag friends. So keep that in mind. All right. Storm movement will be really fast, with storm cells potentially moving towards the northeast at 60 miles per hour or faster. That means people in the path of these storms will need to act very quickly to move to shelter. You're not going to have, all the time in the world to get to your storm shelter. You got, boom, you got to get there fast, because, when you get that warning, don't delay. Don't look out the window and say, hey, is it really going to hit my house? No. By the time you go do that and then get to your shelter, it might be too late. You need to get to your shelter the moment you get that warning, okay? And then for historical context, the Storm Prediction Center changed from 3 levels of risk to 5 in 2015. So we're just looking at 2015 just to compare kind of apples to apples, so to speak. So since 2015, we've been in a day 2 moderate risk. Again, day 2 moderate risk, a level 4 out of 5. Only one other time since 2015, March 18, 21. That event also in March, believe it or not, roughly around the same time of the month. And on that day, several tornadoes had occurred. Okay, so just want to put that into some historical context. All right, so we'll get to questions here in just a minute, but just for let folks know, I have here 6 a.m. for the next briefing, but we'll be updating these throughout the event. Okay, by 6 a.m. for sure, you'll get a whole new fresh set of slides. But I'm sure we'll be having some additional updates as we head through the evening hour, and also single slides. Okay. At some point, I don't know the logistics yet, but at some point we're going to spin up a live webinar and run it all day tomorrow. Okay. Again, just keep track of your email, and you'll know when it's going to happen. Of course, we have one scheduled anyway for 11:30, because we always have that hard programmed in every Monday at 11:30, but I may end up starting that sooner. Okay, so again, you'll get the heads up by email if that when that happens. All right. Again, I can't give you the exact time right now. Very fluid situation. So anyway, that is our briefing as of 2 p.m. here on this 15th of March 2016.